This dinner that has so much tradition, 90 years, and you've finally done away with the head table. You know, who's to say there isn't progress in Rotary? This is just amazing. It's wonderful to be here with Frank and Seal, Bob and Ann, Jean, all the governors, to see so many friends from this district and from upstate New York and Ontario, and wherever else, Dubai, I guess, wherever else that you might have come from this evening to be here. You know, I've been asked to speak somewhat briefly, not too briefly, about the end of polio. How is it going to happen? Where is it going to happen? How did we get to this point? And why is it important? Why does it still matter? About a year ago, I had the privilege of going to the Philippines, and they asked me to go to speak to 5 Rotary districts, 5 nights in a row, and to speak about polio eradication, to speak about the Rotary Foundation. And my good friend Geir Tamangan, who's a Rotary International Director from there, said, you know, Mike, we could go golfing during the day. And I said, Geir, I'm not coming to Manila with my plane ticket paid for by Rotary to go golfing. I'm not going to do it. And he said, well, what would you like to do? I said, I'd like to see Rotary projects. I'd like to see the Camp Sunshines of Manila. I'd like to see the different things that one does. And that trip, there were 3 things that really stand out to me, of things I saw that I'd ever seen. One has really nothing to do with polio. They took me to Quezon City, which is right next to Manila, and they took me to a maternity hospital. And they took me to a room that's about the size of where all the tables are in this room, if you can visualize that. And in that room, there was bed after bed after bed with mothers who had just had children. In some cases, there were 2 or 3 women sharing a bed. And the Rotary Club there, the reason they took me there was that they had given to that hospital a milk pasteurizer, which women from the community came in, and women who were there, and it was sort of like, for lack of a better term, a milk harvesting operation. And you know, it just, the things that Rotarians do, you know, I'm a single guy. You know, you just don't know about those things. But to see it, and to see these healthy babies, we went into the intensive care ward for the new babies, and the incubators were there. And in this little small room, there must have been 150 babies in these incubators. And those, because the mothers were unable to provide milk directly to them, they were all getting milk as a result of this pasteurizer that the Rotary Club had donated. And you know, you see that also on that trip there. I met a gentleman named June Tam Bunting. June runs pawn shops. He owns pawn shops. And you know, we look at this eradication of polio, and how did it begin? There was a Rotarian in the Philippines called Benny Santos. Benny Santos decided that, you know, maybe we could somehow eradicate polio in the Philippines and get a grant to do it. June Tam Bunting was one of those Rotarians who actually administered the grant. This what was called a Health, Hunger, and Humanity grant. And, you know, knowing how close we are, and to be there with a Rotarian who has lived 30 years from the very beginning, know that he had a major part in beginning it, and to see how close it was in. I don't think I could be more inspired. So then another day, I said, I want to go where the first polio drops were given in the Philippines. And I had heard it was a park. There was a president of Rotary by the name of James Bomar. I don't know if he spoke at this dinner, might be in the program. But James Bomar gave those first drops, and I stood on the grass at the exact same spot that happened. Why did I do that? Why did I have the need to do that? You know, I had just taken over from Bob as chair of the polio committee, and I needed inspiration. I think we all need inspiration to see something to the end. And I look at this, the alpha, the omega, the beginning, the end. In order to see the end, I felt I needed to see the beginning. It did inspire me. And ever since then, you know, I feel every day we are getting closer, ever so closer, to the eradication of polio. A few months ago, not so much for inspiration, but for advocacy to support the Rotarians in Pakistan, one of the 2 countries now where polio is endemic. I went over with Carol Pandak, who is the chief Rotary staff person for polio eradication, and we visited Pakistan. It was amazing. It was like 120 degrees every day that we were there. It was the hottest week, they said, in 30 years. We were in Karachi. While we were there, 1,000 people died of dehydration while we were there. We went to Islamabad, and one morning we were in a nice hotel. We went downstairs, and there was a gentleman who was limping, approaching us, dressed in Pakistani, you know, typical clothing, white gown. And he was limping, and I was thinking, oh, Aziz Memon, our polio coordinator there, says, Michael, there's someone that wants to meet you. And I was thinking, this gentleman is someone who suffered from polio. And that was the case. But he didn't suffer how you might think. The reason he was limping was he had been shot in both feet while he was running a polio resource center that was immunizing children. There are people in Pakistan who don't want to see polio eradicated. At least there were a few years ago. And this man was shot in both feet. His brother was killed at another time in trying to eradicate polio. So, you know, we heard earlier about commitment. We talk about commitment. You know, I look at this particular gentleman, and I don't know, I really see the importance of seeing this through to the end. You know, 30 years Rotarians have done this. We looked at the graph for this particular district, you know, ever increasing amounts of giving. And I think the perseverance and the commitment that all of you have to do this, that same trip, we went to this small city called Nowshera. Nowshera is right next to Peshawar, which is another larger city in Pakistan. And we went again to one of these polio resource centers. It was extremely hot, and the power was off, but there were 8 what they call lady health workers. And they had burqas that you couldn't see their faces. And these are the women who go door to door in that neighborhood actually providing the polio drops. And they asked me, one of them, would you give a polio drop to my child? Yeah. How could you say no? And you know what? That wasn't though me giving that polio drop. That was all of you doing it. Because, you know, the eradication of polio, we often talk about it as the corporate project of Rotary International. We look at people like Bob Scott, and, you know, Bob has done wonderful work, has just been, you know, could not have had a better leader in the eradication of polio. But you know what? Bob Scott didn't do it. I don't do it now as the chair of the committee. You know, it bothers me every time I hear it referred to as the project of Rotary International. The eradication of polio is the collective project of 35,000 Rotary clubs. You know, when you look at the displays that we had of what the clubs in this room have done this particular district $1.2 million. You know, that's happening to the walks that you saw in the street. Ann Cargile over here. You know, January 1st, she foolishly goes in, what body of water? Lake George. She goes in Lake George on January 1st in order to raise money for the eradication of polio, and she recruits other people to do it as well. These things happen around this country, across Canada, and around the world in 35,000 places, that people want kids in the future to be able to walk. They want mothers in the future not to have to worry about whether or not their kids will get polio. You know, I didn't really need to go to the Philippines to be inspired. The more that I've worked at this, now over a year as the chairman, the inspiration comes from Greece, New York, Skaneateles, New York, Rochester, New York, Brockport, and I could go on and on. I'm not going to name every community that you folks are from, but that's where the inspiration occurs. It's the fact that Rotarians have the persistence that they are getting it done, and they're getting it done every day. It's like, they took me to Camp Sunshine today, the campus. And, you know, I know there's various camps now, various clubs that operate on that one campus. And, you know, that started about the same time this dinner started. And you look at the tree house there, if any of you have ever been there. And you look at all the other buildings and facilities, and you think of the kids that go there. You know, when I was walking there, I wasn't all that talkative. I was taken a little cold. Thanks for making me feel at home. It was a little cold, but you know, the reason I was quiet, I was thinking of all the kids who weren't there on this cold, almost winter day, cold fall day. I was thinking of, you know, the kids who, you know, so many ailments that still are here that make them a little less able. But then I was thinking, if you still had polio in upstate New York, can you imagine what that camp's needs would be? Can you imagine what that would look like? You know, and sadly, we still have in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and we're still solidifying our gains in Africa. We still have polio in those areas, and it's you know, to me, it's absolutely amazing the progress that we're making. But I also recognize that it's not done. It's not done. We are this close, but it's not done. And as I go to different meetings with the World Health Organization, with other organizations, you hear about the progress. But you know, there's still about 50 kids that were diagnosed with polio so far this year, all of them from the wild polio virus in Pakistan and Afghanistan. On that visit to Pakistan, we visited emergency operation centers that Rotary had helped to fund. We visited these polio resource centers. We looked at transit points. We went to train stations and bus stations where Rotarians sponsor health camps, where people come in, they get their polio drops, and they move on. We visited with leaders. We visited, for example, with the opposition leader for Pakistan. We visited with the president of Pakistan. We visited with the health minister of Pakistan. They welcomed us. The reason they did that is because they respect Rotary. They respect Rotarians, and because they're committed to working with us to get the job done. That wasn't always done. So when people say, is polio going to get done? When is it going to get done? You know, we're still nervous about Africa. We don't have the surveillance that we need. It's still going to take a lot. It's going to take $1.5 billion more to get this done. $1.5 billion more to get this done. And a lot of that's in Africa. Just the International PolioPlus Committee met 2 weeks ago. Bob was there. And we were looking at different funding needs. And I had, you know, you get them from the different countries. They come mainly from the World Health Organization and UNICEF. And I looked at it. And, you know, we don't actually fund so much the vaccine itself because other people are willing to fund that. We fund with a lot of operational costs. And I added it up. We were funding just in 1/3 of our grants for the year as a result of your contributions and the Gates match. We were funding 120,000 individuals who actually provide the polio drops, the lady health workers, they're mostly ladies, men in some places in Afghanistan. We were funding their drivers, the supervisors. We were funding the rental of ferries. We were funding the rental of cars. We were funding vans. And I don't remember what country, I think there were 8 horses that we were actually funding the use of horses in order to get those polio drops out there. So, you know, we're being asked to give money. Every dollar that we give gets matched by the Gates Foundation with $2. So if you announce that $2,800 was raised from the diamonds, it was actually 3 times that, because the Gates Foundation matches those funds. But, you know, what we are doing is crucially important, because it is going to take money to get this done. You know, Rotary has committed through the Gates Challenge alone, the $2 matched every match, $100 million more that we're going to contribute to the eradication of polio. Last year, Rotarians gave $39 million. You know, this happens, if you multiply it all down, that's about a little over $1,000 per club in the world. And, you know, the goal is that we encourage every club to give $1,500. The reason we do that is because, you know, some clubs are small, they can't afford it, whatever, some clubs can do more. But, you know, all of that is matched, and that is providing the resources that are going to get this done. The other so important piece that Rotarians do that isn't so much recognized is that we provide advocacy to the countries of the world. Just this week, a friend of mine, Kazuhiko Ozawa-san, who is a restaurant owner in Japan, led a delegation of members of the Japanese parliament, the Diet, to go to Pakistan with the hopes that the Japanese government would give money for the eradication of polio. And, you know, so if you look at these numbers, I said there's $1.5 billion to go, $100 million from Rotarians. Where does the other $1.4 billion come from? About more than half of that comes from the efforts of Rotarians to advocate to the governments of the world. Trips like this one that Kazuhiko led of Japanese folks to Pakistan. We have folks that are working with the European Parliament. Those folks who you hear from Canada now. You know, we hope and pray that the election result tomorrow, and we know it will be, no matter what party wins in Canada tomorrow in their election, we know that Bob Scott, Wilf Wilkinson, Karen, and others who are here from Canada are going to be in touch with their members of parliament and are going to keep those commitments. Some of you were at the Rotary Convention in Sydney a few years ago. Tony Abbott got up, the Prime Minister, and said that they were going to give 100 million Australian dollars to the eradication of polio. Those commitments happen because Rotarians asked for it. In fact, the Harper government in Canada and the Abbott government in Australia said, stop sending us letters, we got the message. And, you know, that's what Rotarians do here in the United States. We actually, so this is a little controversial, we pay for a lobbyist. Because that's the way you have to do things in Washington, D.C. But you know what? For our investment in that lobbyist, the return is more than $1,000 for every dollar we spend in order to get the U.S. government to continue to fund polio programs at the Centers for Disease Control and through that to the World Health Organization. And that's because Rotarians go down there, they knock on their congressmen and women's doors, their senators' doors, and they also write back at the home. So, you know, that's just wonderful. So, you know, this state's special. You know, you have both the leading Republican and the leading Democrat leading the presidential race. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. You ought to be proud of that. I'll leave it at that. But you think about it. You know, the point is, you know, no matter who wins elections, Rotarians, whether they be Republicans or Democrats over the years, they've gotten this message through the eradication of polio. So when will it end? When do we expect the last case? There's been many predictions over the years, and I think I'll have a glass of water. You know, at this point, we hope. We hope and we believe what Pakistan is now doing will result in no more cases after next year. Everything we see is leading to that conclusion. Afghanistan is a fascinating country. You know, every week you pick up the news, there's something strange going on in Afghanistan. You know, it affects the polio program as well. The good news is we're only in a few little pockets, and in those pockets we hope to have success. So the good news is as you saw on the slides, Nigeria had their last case more than a year ago. Africa had its last case more than a year ago. India's now had its last case more than 4.5 years ago. Pakistan only has about 1/4 of the cases that it had a year ago. Afghanistan is actually upticked a little, but we're talking about 15 cases for the year. Polio is about to be over. But we can't get complacent. It's not done. We still need to make sure we raise the immunity levels. So therefore, we're going to have to continue to be at this for a couple more years, even after we see the last case. It's because you don't want to be up to the finish line of a marathon and look at the line and suddenly sit down. You know, it's finishing the race means going 3 years without a single case, and it means having it certified and having the surveillance strong enough to make sure the cases aren't there. We are this close, we're getting closer. So I want to thank you. Not on behalf of the International PolioPlus Committee, not on behalf of Rotary International. I want to thank you as a member of one of those 35,000 Rotary clubs that's doing it. You know, I know people that have had polio, people who still suffer from polio, and that's who matters. That is what matters. It's those kids who aren't getting polio. And you know, I don't know if I have any standing to thank you on behalf of them, but I'll do it anyway. You know, it's Bob Scott. Always, you know, I've been with him several times, and he's given polio speeches, and some before small groups, and so he's heard this story from me a million times. I will never ever forget, back in 2008, it was when we first got some money from the Gates Foundation, and it was $100 million at the time, and Bob came in, we were in a restaurant with Kaz Ozawa, name I mentioned earlier, and Bob raised his glass and he said, "To the children of the world." You know, that's what we're doing. Smallpox has been eradicated. We're looking at polio, soon to be eradicated. We're doing this for the children of the world. Yes, it will accrue some recognition to Rotary, not as much perhaps as we'd like to see. Bill Gates will get some credit, but you know what? Bill Gates is investing $400 million a year now in the eradication of polio, and we'd be lost without him, he and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So, you know, he deserves the recognition as well, as does the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the Centers for Disease Control, the governments of the world, and the Rotarians in the countries where polio is endemic. So, polio is almost over. We need to continue to work at it. What comes next? We don't know. Rotary is looking at many different opportunities. Rotarians around the world are going to have to decide if we want another large corporate project. The point is the dialogue is beginning, but it's all couched in the fact nothing will be launched until polio is eradicated. So, it's been a great honor to stand essentially in the same place where Paul Harris once stood, where Don Elhart once stood, where Pete, your president of the Rochester Club, once stood. But the greatest honor for Rotary will be knowing that we made a difference in the world in eradicating a disease that had been around for 1,000 years. And on this 90th anniversary of the Eastern Cities Fellowship Dinner, yeah, the head table's gone, but in those 90 years, the one thing that's remained the same, two things, fellowship and that there are people in the world for all of those 90 years who've had polio. I look forward to the 93rd Eastern Cities Fellowship Dinner, when there no longer will be polio, and the sign up and back of me that says "End Polio Now" will say, "Did it." Thank you very much. Congratulations on all you're doing. Congratulations on 90 years of Eastern Cities Dinner.